And this is the last interview from Lviv, of this trip at least. Before I jump in, I want to say thank you to everyone who has helped to make it happen, who supported the channel through Patreon, Buy Me a Coffee, to make sure we could come here and record these important conversations. We've still got plenty more to publish. There's been an embargo on publishing some of them while delegates from Brave One were still in the city. So you're going to get a treat over the next couple of days as you see interviews with leading technologists and civic society leaders. And I am more than delighted to introduce a friend of the channel, friend of mine, Joseph Lindsley. And it's been a while since we talked. I definitely, hand on heart, we should talk more frequently. And of course, take advantage of the extraordinary amount of things in the media. I mean, we're just hearing, as we record this, about the latest incursion of MiGs into Estonia, which is buzzing NATO airspace. And at this point, you know, we need to start drawing conclusions from those. Well, I'll stop rambling on. Joseph Lindsley has been in Ukraine since the very start of the full-scale war, reporting daily through a variety of platforms. He is not only one of the strongest voices explaining why Ukraine is one of the freest countries on earth, but also explaining why Ukraine must win and Russia and its vision of autocracy for the world must lose. Joe, welcome.
Jonathan, great to see you here in Lviv, and indeed we had an extraordinary week with Brave One, and now when this can be published, we can talk about it. I know that every American I know who cares about innovation, who cares about national security, including people at the Pentagon, if they had been with us at this conference the past days, they would become total believers in Ukraine. And in a positive sense, saying, look at this incredible innovation to defend freedom, but also in the negative part of it, saying we must not allow Russia and China to control this incredible innovation and tech that's happening here in Ukraine. And that's my big takeaway from the past few days.
This is the real risk, isn't it? Now, I think Ukraine is not going to fall, which is good on so many different levels. But if the worst case scenario were to be realized and Russia was to gobble up people that it could use for its armies, that's bad enough. But it would take a huge amount of innovations which would empower China, Russia, North Korea to dominate the European continent. I mean, we're talking about a threat on that scale. We're talking about a threat that could extinguish all the process of democratization of the last 200 years.
200 exactly. The progress toward democracy of 200 years, and then especially since the end of World War II, and you look at all of the Russian incursions in the past week into Poland. I mean, these are violent incursions. The drones that Ukrainians have suffered from. You now have air raid alarms. This is put it this way to the American audience in particular, but also to the Europeans. There are air raid alarms now going off in Poland.
And Romania.
And
Moldova.
And then now there was a Russian incursion into, it was Latvia, right?
It was Estonia. Estonia,
yeah.
3 MiGs spent apparently 12 minutes in Estonian airspace. My question would be, and they were going slower apparently. Well, this is according to one of the sources I read. They were going around 500 miles an hour, which is apparently slower than their standard operating speed. So this is a clear demonstration of the power to humiliate NATO and penetrate its sovereign airspace and territory. It's entirely predictable, unfortunately, as are the next stage of escalation. I mean, it's my belief that as we ratchet up through escalation, the next level is quite possibly going to be closing European civilian airspace, or at least buzzing it, which would cost hundreds of millions of dollars or euros in lost revenue. Tot that up against the savings by buying Russian oil and all this other stuff, well, it just doesn't add up. We're going to be losing way more money than anything we save on still buying Russian, mineral assets and all the rest.
Well, and we should get to the as I call it, just stop Russian oil. You know, the just stop oil people. Yeah. I focus on just stop Russian oil. But before that, just think about, when I was here in Lviv during that horrible attack just over a week ago. And there was that one day. It was September 11th. So already a remarkable
resonance.
Day.
There's already
and that was the day where we had. And I remember I went to bed that night here in Lviv, and the fact that we had been through a horrible attack was a small detail of my day. Think about that. I mean, the building where we're recording right now, this building was shaking from the explosions of the major Russian drone attack on Lviv. And when I went to bed that night, that was just, I had forgotten what I had gone through because so much else happened that day. We had the assassination of Charlie Kirk in America. We had Russian, I call it what it was, an invasion of Poland. Russia sent drones into Poland, deep into Poland. Airports were forced to shut down. Their houses destroyed. And the Poles, here's how unaware everyone in Europe I think has been. I was awake and monitoring things because we were under attack in Ukraine. And all of a sudden we get information that the drones are moving into Polish airspace and not like accidentally on the edge.
Not a few,
no, but deep into
19
it.
maybe.
So I start calling and texting friends in Warsaw, people, including people at the high levels of Polish politics and media, saying, "Hey, you're aware of this, right?" No one was aware of it at all, and they woke up and all of a sudden they're following it. But it was their first experience, except for the few that have traveled here, the first experience in the war, and this was an extraordinary thing. And then, of course, we had this the murder of Charlie Kirk and all that. And so everyone gets very distracted about these things. Even I did. I mean, I remember going to sleep that night thinking, oh, wait, I forgot. This morning was horrible here in Lviv, and the very building I was in was shaking from that. And so we have Russia incredibly emboldened and such a lackluster and weak response in many ways. But we also see movement on other sides. And a positive moment I saw in the past week was in the state visit of the Trumps to Windsor Castle. And King Charles, of course, in coordination with Sir Keir Starmer, but this is something King Charles definitely had the personality to do this. He looked to President Trump when he was giving his speech, and he said, the UK and our allies, and he looked at Trump and said, we stand with Ukraine. And so we need some moments of strength like that amid all this absolute chaos and mess. And then another key moment from that was afterward at Chequers, I believe it was, with the Starmer and Trump press conference. And for me, I'm always interested, how do we influence people? How do we understand how people think? President Trump said to Sir Keir in front of the press, he said, until a few weeks ago, he was unaware that European countries were still buying Russian oil and gas. And I think that he was totally sincere in that. And for me, I'm saying, I'm always trying to cry out in the wilderness. Everything that we know and pro-Ukraine people know and pro-freedom people know that's not necessarily known at the highest levels of politics in the capitals of the world, especially in Washington.
Бажаємо міцного здоров'я. Ми бійці батальйону безпілотних систем Black Raven 93-ї бригади Холодний Яр виконуємо бойове завдання на Константинівському напрямку в Донецькій області. Для їх успішного виконання наш підрозділ має потребу в пікапах для виїзду особового складу на позиції, евакуації, своєчасного підвозу боєприпасів, дронів та обладнання в район ведення бойових дій. Звертаємося до YouTube-спільноти Silicon Curtain та Джонатана особисто з проханням допомогти підтримати збір, а також до Car for Ukraine та Бандера Мобіль з проханням допомогти з купівлею, підготовкою та доставкою авто на фронт. Слава Україні!
Героям слава!
And even the media and people. I mean, we were talking earlier, and I think actually there should be a focus on oil, because if we are trying to pressure the US to have more, I would call it, of not just a geopolitically strategic policy, but a moral policy, and using that almost as a kind of moral blackmail, which we actually do see people despairing of America, but then not sorting out their own. The optics of Europe continuing to buy LNG, to buy Russian oil, to service Russian LNG ships, to not challenge the Grey Fleet, to not protect even their own fiber optic cables. The optics of this are appalling. If you want others to be aligned with you, you have to show strength to your enemies, but also you have to show strength to your allies.
Well, and we've seen this. Now, I mean, I was an American here in Ukraine. I felt this frustration deeply these past years. And for example, in Poland in the past weeks, there was an attitude against Ukrainians. for various reasons, and I don't want to go deep into it, but all of a sudden now Poland's getting attacked by Russia. It was an attack. And the Poles, they only see, for example, the Ukrainian refugees who have left Ukraine. That's what they see. And they take care of them, and they contribute to their economy too. But they don't see the guys in the trenches, who are actually defending not just Ukraine, but all of Europe. And I think what this week showed us is that Ukraine is actually the big, beautiful wall for all of Europe. And so a lot of this is about optics and how we don't feel things until they hit us. And what pro-Ukraine voices like you have been crying out is, let's learn from the past. Let's not wait until we all get smacked, and let's try to prepare for this. So I think it is. And Hillary Clinton pointed this out about Trump. She said Trump in this second term is actually working well with NATO by being tough on NATO, by being engaged, and pointing out to Europe that Europe as a whole has given Russia more money through gas and oil than there's been in real aid to Ukraine.
This should be one of the lessons. This should be one of the lessons of Trump watchers, which is that you think that he doesn't notice this, that, and the other. But what we've consistently seen is that people that show strength and confidence in his presence, even if he's trying to intimidate you with tariffs and all the rest, if you bite back and you show strength, he sees it. He sees it, and you actually cut through and you get respect. I have to say, a little bit like Putin, you demonstrate weakness and obsequiousness or a lack of respect, you're not even going to get on his radar. So we've got to learn these lessons, that it's power and alliance through strength.
Well, but a lesson that I push as someone who knows a lot of people in the world of the White House and MAGA is that a lot of their opinions are formed with a lack of information. And this is just normal. I mean, that what we know, people far away don't know. And I say this to Ukrainians because in January 2022, most Ukrainians did not believe that this full-scale war was going to happen. I have a lot of friends in the Pentagon and Intel, and they were all telling me this is going to happen, and I believed it. We had good evidence. Ukrainians laughed at me. And so I say to Ukrainians, if you were laughing at me here in Ukraine in January 2022, how do you expect someone in Washington or Malibu, California to care and take this seriously? And once you realize that, then you can step back and say, this is where you need this idea of empathy and say, okay, we have a problem and we need other people to understand what it is. How do we tell that story? And so that's why, for example, I mean, we had a great opportunity, a horrible moment with the murder in my hometown of Irina Zarutska, my hometown where I grew up, Charlotte, North Carolina, and on a train that I've taken several times at least. And Americans with the course of 10 days in the world watched. Most people are not in a war, so they're not used to seeing people be killed. We're used to it here, unfortunately.
But even this is shocking because it's so cold-blooded, it's so psychopathic the way it happened, it's so random and cruel. If she was, 20 seconds later out of her workplace, it's the sheer brutality and pointlessness of it, I think, really hits home in a way that a drone does as well. But this just seems so unnecessary.
Well, and it hits home. I mean, it's all unnecessary as we know. But if you're in the States, you just think people in a war, and you've heard all this different bad narratives about Ukraine that are not true, and you can't possibly understand it. So, if everything's closed, there's curfew here, so we have. That's why we have interruptions.
Yeah, we're gonna get chucked out in a minute because curfew time is gonna hit.
This is the reality of life here, but. The thing, because I focus on and trying to get people to understand each other on this idea of empathy. So part of it is, how do you get Kyiv to speak the language of Washington? I think someone who understands empathy very well in politics is the Finnish president, Alexander Stubb, Secure, your prime minister, King Charles. Understand to whom you're speaking. And you're not only speaking to Trump. He's president because he understands the American people. People forget that. He won because he listened to the mood and he projected it. It's a dance. You listen to the people, but you lead them. And that's how politics works. And so we have to, if you're supporting Ukraine, you have to think in the same way. And so I look at that, the moment, the murder of Irina, it hit close to home. And I know it because Charlotte's my hometown. So I talked to my family and friends there, and everyone was like horrified by it. You would be horrified anyway, but then when it's that close to home, and then when it's in America, and because it was a Ukrainian woman, this was the first time for many people who've opposed Ukraine that they had sympathy for Ukrainian.
For an individual.
For an individual.
Kind of put a face on it, yeah.
Yeah, but that opens it up because, and for me, I'm saying, and I had a lot of problem with, like, a lot of elite media didn't want to talk about this.
I was about to ask this because I'm still trying to get my head around this, because we had a discussion where you said that actually there's an inverse racism going on here, but there's also layers of politics, which is that clearly the justice system has absolutely failed. That this, I'm going to use an expletive, which I shouldn't, but this guy was on the street when he shouldn't.
Yeah.
The justice system failed to identify and not just rehabilitate, but failed to lock him up in this case. He clearly was a recidivist and a danger. And it does come into sort of some politics there about not just the sort of leniency or failure of the system. It also comes to the point where you talk about the mainstream media, where there have been some horrific crimes by white people on black, and that is reported extensively. I think of the church murder that happened, and that's horrific because children are involved.
Years ago.
And I think this one was last year, and actually a lot of people died, and it's horrific. So fair enough, cover that, but cover this as well. But you think there's something more insidious kind of going on here?
Yeah, well, I mean, because we'd had even just in the lead up to this, in the past week, so we have Trump sending the National Guard to different cities. Now, to Washington is one thing; it's a federal district. That's a different constitutional story. As a constitutionalist, I can appreciate that. But to other cities, Chicago, Los Angeles, is a different story. And so it was in that context, and people were upset about that. But the reason why that's happening, or why many people will tolerate that, is because what we see before our eyes watching the murder of Irina. Like, there's a problem. But what I was saying as someone who's here in Ukraine is that there's a deeper problem. And this gets missed with every mass murder or every heinous murder that we see in America. The deeper problem is cultural. So here in Ukraine, when there's no missile attack, when there's no air raid alarm, and I'm in Kharkiv, 30 miles from Russia, and there's a blackout and there's no lights, you can walk those streets safely. A girl can walk those streets, she can walk her dog at night safely. She will not be raped, she will not be killed. The only threat is from the Russians in the sky, because here they've created this wonderful society. They're rooted in family and tradition and community, and people look out for each other. And everything that J.D. Vance said in that speech in Munich, that he was crying that Europe has lost these values, those values are here in Ukraine. That's why these people are willing to fight, because they believe in this stuff. And a train or a subway or anything in Ukraine is safer than the counterpart in the U.S.
And you'll have people, and I've spoken to them, you'll have people who were from the first generation Azov, who had more of a, dare I say, a nationalist character. Not now, let's not perpetuate that narrative. But you'd have people from Pravé Sector, you'd have people who would be considered extreme far right in Europe, fighting in trenches with Jews, Muslims, gay men, women, fighting with people whose values they don't necessarily want to sort of, even promote or propagate, but they're fighting together for common cause. And they don't believe in political violence against people they don't agree with. And that is something, unfortunately, where we've moved away from. There's another rather curious story there about the Russian legions that fight here, who apparently got into a fight at a funeral of a gay Ukrainian who died. Now that tells you something about Russian values, unfortunately. But it's no tolerance even to people who are on your side.
Yeah. No, this is a society where tradition and tolerance are the same thing. They work together. And but at a very basic level, look at crime statistics. There's not violent crime in Ukrainian cities. The violent crime is from Russia in the sky. And in Europe, there's violent crime and your problems. And look at the way Ukrainians protest. They do it peacefully. You don't need cops to the protests, as we saw in July.
So sensitive.
And you don't see this in the protests in London, whether it's from the left or the right. Okay, and then look at so what And I met with a lot of censorship. I met pro-Ukraine media that told me they didn't want to cover Irina's story because for some reason they were afraid they would fall into some political narrative. But I will say, as an American, that backfired horribly because people said, wait, you're asking us to care about Ukrainians far away and to give our weapons, and you won't talk about a Ukrainian woman killed in our cities where we feel that we're suffering? And so this is where we have to have this empathetic connection. And I say the same with Charlie Kirk. I mean, again, it was a horrible night here, or morning, and then a few hours later we find out Charlie Kirk was killed.
I say you know him personally, so this really cuts through to you.
Yeah,
so you've met him, and
I just with different styles and things.
Different style. You don't have to agree with some, but it feels more raw and immediate.
Well, of course. I mean, you see someone you've met and their face blown off, and there was a lot of mythology, lies about Kirk. I mean, he would actually go and engage people. That his whole shtick. If you watch the videos, he would debate with people and was super respectful.
In public, and he'd defend his views.
But he would let people say he would let people challenge him. Yeah. And this is what I see in Ukraine. Ukraine, you can have this type of free speech. You can disagree vehemently. We see it all the time. People disagree about Zelensky, for example.
You don't want to cancel someone. You don't want to cut them out.
People
You're
are
not going to shout them down.
Because they have this. They're also, because I see it Ukrainian holidays, like because they have rituals and tradition. That you have your disagreements, but these family connections and neighborhood and friendship connections override everything, and that's a lot of what we lost in America. And so, I see this connection, and what I'm hoping Americans can see through this is that everything Ukrainians are fighting for, people in America who are worried about, in the UK, are worried about the loss of free speech. Ukrainians are literally fighting for that. Ukrainians believe in free speech more than anyone, and they actually practice it.
We had a long conversation, I think it was back in January, about empathy. And once you start to lose empathy in a society, your politics degrades quickly. And actually it's a slippery slope towards totalitarianism. And this isn't a thought that had really percolated into me, because I wasn't sure how to handle. If I'd spoken to you, we would have found a way through it, as we're doing now. But I hadn't thought of a way of how to handle that story without it being manipulative, and I think we've found a way to absolutely do it perfectly. But it struck me that Irina's death reduces freedom because that was not covered in a non-partisan way. As you say, the mainstream media ignored it, even though it had extraordinary prominence and resonance, and that's a conscious political choice. Charlie Kirk's death reduces freedom, not because of what he did or didn't do for freedom, but because he's someone who's willing to go out in public and, as you say, state his views. That anyone who has a prominent voice, even if you vehemently disagree with every single word they've ever uttered, a violent death of such a person reduces the freedom of everybody, even if you can't see it.
But
and
Jonathan,
empathy.
One thing that everyone misses, and I think the media narratives miss this about Kirk, and so I'm sensitive to this because I see how the reality of Ukraine is missed in the U.S. Okay, and you're sensitive to that too. So I'm also, the way you break through the walls of propaganda is to talk about what everyone misses. So Charlie Kirk, you can see all these videos. And Bill Maher had a nice tribute to him, and so did Gavin Newsom. He was recently on Gavin Newsom's podcast. Gavin really respected him, even though they totally hate each other politically, because, and I encourage you to watch the Gavin Newsom Charlie Kirk interview.
I'll watch that, definitely.
So
yeah.
Charlie didn't just go with a microphone like some people you might know in the UK and yell at a rally. Charlie Kirk welcomed people to come up to the mic and challenge him. And it was only and always about communication, conversation. And he was extremely respectful. Yeah. Extremely. And you can even see there was a video of the guy who asked the last question before Charlie was killed. And totally disagreed with him.
Totally disagreed, and he was, and actually, Charlie Kirk asked him to clarify the question. He wanted to make sure he absolutely understood the question and the background to it. I mean, I did mention that on the day. I said, look, anyone who goes into the public arena, into potentially an audience of people who are hostile to their views, that has a form of bravery. Now that we've got a character in the UK, Peter Hitchens, I barely agree with anything he says, although sometimes he, a broken clock is correct twice a day. But he will also go into the public arena. He will discuss things with anybody he kind of relishes debate, even though the personality might not be the best. That you've got to have some respect for that. That is a form of bravery, actually.
Well, that's what I would say to Americans watching, is that if you feel misunderstood, and to American conservatives in MAGA, I hope you, because I say this as someone that comes from that world, Ukrainians feel the same way understood by you, by Americans. Because you haven't listened to them. You've listened to what spin doctors say or elite politicians say, but have you taken the time to listen to Ukrainians? I believe, for example, if Charlie Kirk ever came to Ukraine, he would have changed his mind about it.
Well, Ben Shapiro had
of course,
I would say come to Jesus moment. He's Jewish, so obviously that's the wrong analogy. But he had an about turn, and it wasn't just.
He was always in favor of Ukraine, but coming here made him more engaged.
Yeah. And I think maybe being engaged with Israel and understanding the complexity of fighting for your survival against essentially, there are rights and wrongs and there are ways to do it. But basically understanding what something like Hamas is totally opposed to freedom of their own people and actually wants to export, terror and repression around the world. I think that gives that makes it more transferable, actually, understanding Ukraine's plight. But that's the key. Everyone's stuck in their left-right bubbles. They're not thinking about freedom. Does a certain act or a certain lack of empathy in the public space, does it increase freedom? Does it reduce freedom? People immediately reach for their left-right identities.
But I think we're always going to have those, and it's all right. We're going to have these differences. But here's what we see here in Europe now, not just Ukraine, because we see Russia going beyond. And if we can make this into something good, realize that there's a lot of things we can disagree about. What we will not and must not disagree about is the fact that we're not able to disagree. And if we live in a world controlled by Russia and China, there's no room for...
You won't have the power of disagreement there.
No, we lose our foundation of freedom. And so we have to realize, always start by this sense of let's agree that we believe in this idea of Republican democratic life. This idea of freedom in some broad sense. I think it really is all about free speech. It's totally about free speech. And if we can agree on that, and I know the UK... I think you have some problems in the UK on free speech, but I think
we have some things that need to be tackled. I mean, I think some of it's exaggerated, some of it isn't. The previous government restricted the right of free protest, and the current government, which claim and vehemently opposed it at the time, should have reversed these things, but haven't. So this isn't a left-right problem, but there is a sliding scale of choosing security over freedom.
Yeah.
And that's something we shouldn't let governments
and
get away with.
Show that it's scary and dangerous, but Ukrainians choose freedom over security. Because if they were the other way,
they'd be Russia.
Well, no, more than that, and this is the key term, which, by the way, Trump is starting to say, Lindsley is starting to say, and I think it's super important. Ukraine, if they surrendered, which you're free to do, and if you're scared, why not? If Ukraine surrendered, they would be part of the Russian war machine. And I want everyone to think about that, because everything we saw at the Brave One Tech Conference the past week, incredible tech of people who want to be free, innovating, to stop the enemies of freedom. If that was in the hands of China and Russia, because Ukraine falling into Russia's hands is not neutral. All of a sudden it means Russia has the largest country in Europe, with one of the most educated engineering populations, proportionally, especially after 3.5 years of full-scale resistance. Goodbye to Berlin and everyone else. I mean, so this is...
They've already done it.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't realize that the male population of Donbass, the occupied territories, has been decimated in an internal, hidden genocide. Because the male population, whether they wanted to be liberated by Russia or not, have been turned into meat for the cannons and thrown into the grinder.
Well, Russia has, because it comes from less educated, sophisticated population, they have the numbers. And if you give Russia the intelligence and ingenuity of Ukraine, that's a scary thing for the world. And I think the world doesn't see this, but they should be thanking Ukraine for standing against it. And I think here's what we see. Yes, we're always going to have these serious debates in the West, and we should, and nothing's going to be perfect. But Ukraine, I think, can help heal us in many ways by realizing the precious baseline freedom that we should all not take for granted, and that we should all defend together. And I would see this in a few moments of these videos I saw with Charlie debating with people. You'd see Charlie making the concession to the person asking the question and vice versa. And Charlie Kirk did say, at the moment we stop talking, just the guns start firing. And I think this applies to people in a free society, and we have to realize that if this baseline idea for which Ukrainians are standing every day, I'll put it this way, Jonathan, because if you against an enemy who doesn't believe in freedom at all, you cannot talk your way out of it, as we see here. You only can do it with
There's no negotiation.
No,
There's
only
defeat.
with, well, you have to be, and I know it's weird to say with all the violence in America, but a well-armed freedom is the only way, as a nation, to stop tyranny. It's the only way. So those of us who believe in freedom have to make sure, and again, that's what we saw with this incredible innovation the past few days. Small little groups of people in their garages making drones that are more and more innovative to protect the freedom of their friends who are fighting at the front line, so that everyone else can be free. And the key now is that the rest of Europe and the U.S. sees that this here in Ukraine is a big, beautiful wall, we could say, for the free world.
The person who inspires me on that is, we've got a friend of the channel, Irina, and her husband Dimka set up a fantastic charity called Jiga's Poor, which one of the most effective charities, the most effective drone charities. He built that up, or they built it up to a point where they had an effective team. The minute that effective team was in place, he signed up, and he's now in Zaporizhia for the last year, on the front, testing the equipment in real time. So this isn't just a sacrifice of your brains and time. Unfortunately, it's a sacrifice of potentially your lives as well. And I think we've got to face that. Otherwise, Russia will steamroll over us.
Well, and I hope people in America, as you know, in a few days there'll be, and maybe after this is aired, the funeral of Charlie Kirk. I'm sure that they will still mention Irina, and a lot of people who listen to this probably don't realize that in America they have not forgotten about Irina Zarudska. That is, you can't watch something that horrible and easily forget it. Usually with news cycles we forget these things, but you'll see memorials to Charlie and to Irina. Don't underestimate the effect of that. In fact, 2 days before Charlie was killed, he said that her murder would change America. People were traumatized by that, and please respect that. And then, I know you're frustrated that you don't see what's happened in Ukraine, but use that as the chance, the opening, to say, hey, yeah, this is horrible, but this is happening on a much larger scale in Europe, and it's coming for all of us. So in Irina's memory, in Charlie's memory, let's all stand for free speech, and let's support the people who are willing to do the fighting before it spills over into our countries, which is starting to do already.
If it's created empathy, we've got to use it in a respectful way. And I think that's absolutely aligned with that. And if anyone doubts what we say, think back to the Russian space program. It was a Ukrainian genius who allowed the Russians to go into space. So if you think, yeah, you're exaggerating about this Ukrainian tech, no. Ukraine is the brains, was the brains, and was the heart of the Soviet Empire. Russia was just the muscle, and we can't let this fall into their hands.
Indeed. And Ukrainians are not letting it happen, but they can only hold the line so long. So the more help that happens, the quicker, the better.
Fantastic, Jim.
Yeah.
Let's do this more often.
Indeed.
Great to see you here.
Дуже дякую. Thank you.